Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Sam Raus, a David Bose Fellow and Young Voices contributor. Today we will be discussing the ongoing US government shutdown and its implications on social welfare programs. Sam, very quickly, can you tell us why has the US government shut down?
Yeah, so the government tends to do this quite often in the United States. It happens, I think, at this point almost annually when essentially the current budget timeline ends, and they have to pass these continuing resolutions to keep the government funded, usually passing one that just maintains the current spending levels as is, and then they negotiate the budget later on. But this time, the continuing resolution failed because Democrats want to see some of the healthcare reforms being made by the Trump administration reversed, as well as some of these Obamacare subsidies from the COVID era continued even long after the COVID pandemic. And so they've ultimately caused for the government to shut down by not voting for the spending bills put forward by the GOP majorities in the White House.
Who is basically being impacted because of the government shutdown?
Well, so far, it's fortunately been predominantly those who work in the federal government. A number of different agencies, things like the Smithsonian museums, congressional offices have been closed. Fortunately, the Trump administration was able to find ways to fund for some of the essential services, including finding private donors that were willing to fund for the paychecks of our military service men and women this past week. But now that seems likely to go to a different level and see some of the social welfare programs, particularly the SNAP benefits, which we more commonly know as food stamps, not be paid out this November 1st and ongoing until the government reopens.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit more about SNAP? You said that it's food stamps, but it's also linked to something called EBT. What it really is that?
Yeah, so over 40 million Americans receive government money through their EBT cards to predominantly pay for groceries, pay for the food that they all need. And this is a very wide assortment of people across the country that use these services in order to maintain really what is, basic daily expenses that they can't afford based off their income level. So it's a poverty focused program. It's means tested based off of your income level, but it's used by what is 12 13% of the United States population, and is relied upon for most of their basic nutritional needs.
Right. Can you basically give us an idea of who really depends on these food stamps, especially in today's America?
Yeah, so it's completely based off of poverty levels, which is particularly a lot of low income communities in the rural South, predominantly Black communities in the South, as well as a lot of our inner cities, places where there's a lack of high paying jobs. There hasn't been the same kind of upward, socioeconomic mobility for people to be able to reach an income level that is out of the threshold. And so these are a lot of people that are still working, people that have some level of employment, but are not making enough to be able to afford, and in their opinion, a lot of times the grocery costs that they need for them and their families. And so, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of families. It's a lot of people with children that are relying on these programs. It's a lot of people that are in unstable working conditions or, gig kind of economy work that is not the same kind of reliable, day-to-day income paycheck that you can budget for your, different needs on a daily basis.
Right. And these people are speaking out on the internet. We've seen an alarming trend, especially online, with people saying that we'll steal if the benefits stop. We'll break into stores if the SNAP benefits stop. What really is going on? Is there like a serious threat of civil unrest in the country right now?
I think there's always a lot of social hysteria around policy decisions, particularly in the day and age of TikTok and social media. But yeah, these are essential services that are heavily relied upon for a lot of these recipients. It's not people that are given these benefits but could do without them. In the way a lot of our healthcare system subsidizes more of the middle class, this is particularly people of very low levels of poverty. And so I do think that there's a serious threat of people, taking up some sort of um, criminal or different arm. I don't know what will ultimately happen. We will wait and see. But there's going to be serious economic anxiety um, when these payments are not being made, and when people are not being able to get the money that they need to pay for food, be able to get food on the table. We know hungry people do rather irrational things. I think that's pretty known by human nature. And so, um, if the government can't get this program reopened, there's been some legislation proposed to specifically fund this program, not reopen the government yet, but provide the funding for this program. And if philanthropies and the nonprofit sector across the country can't reach the people that it needs to reach with food and aid, um, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of stress, a lot of chaos, like we've seen in recent years when supply lines were impacted during the COVID pandemic, like we've seen some different protest movements over the years. Yeah, I think it could really result in something a whole lot worse, given how many people are reliant upon these and what a critical thing it is. It's not, healthcare is rather abstract and long term. It takes a while for people to realize the impacts of healthcare policy changes until they need to go to the doctor and have a problem. People eat every single day, and so they're going to notice this in their pocketbooks really, really fast.
Right. Many people assume that food stamp recipients are unemployed, but as you said earlier in our conversation, and as data often shows, that it's actually majority working families that really depend on these food stamps. So, what does that really tell about the current state of wages in the country? And of course, is there a major cost of living crisis that is basically upon the Americans right now?
Well, I think at this time we've seen, yeah, kind of some level of stagnant growth in terms of particularly working class wages of everyday, store jobs, labor jobs, that a much bigger segment of the population holds than, high skilled tech work. And at the same time, we've seen inflation persist really since COVID and never coming down to pre COVID levels, slowly cooling and not increasing at this point. And so when prices are high and people aren't getting paid more equivalent to those prices, then you start to have this cost of living concern. And I think that there's definitely a real level of push from people of a very wide range of viewpoints and political beliefs in different communities and stuff that, yeah, there needs to be policies focused on real wage growth over other kind of abstract economic data that's put out there. People are always like, well, look, the stock market is growing. And when so many people don't own any stocks, that doesn't really mean much to them when their wage has stayed pretty much the same for year over
Right.
year over year. Um, and at the same time, a real interest, I think, particularly by this administration, but now we're going to start seeing um, more from the left as they win back some control in different elections on inflation and how we can get prices back down um, to match that wage level. And particularly, I think we've seen with energy, we've seen with some other sectors, inflation is reaching even better than it was before. The prices are really coming down because of a focus on being able to supply, being able to have robust supply chains. And so, um, yeah, I think that's particularly a concern with food for so many of these people, and because yeah, this is a working class program. This is people that are relying a lot. There's a lot of people that are abusing the system, and that's been a big focus of this administration too. But there's a lot of regular people using these things routinely within their budgeting, and I think To me, what it underscores is how we've created a crisis of government dependency in this country, where so many people are reliant on critical services, critical needs of theirs being fulfilled by a government program rather than setting up our economy so that people can do that themselves and are self reliant. Because we know the government is so unstable and so clearly not effective at doing these things in the way that an individual, making their own wages, doing their own personal finances, can plan for.
Sam, the government went into shutdown on October the 1st. We are now going to be entering November. This is already the second longest shutdown in US history. It could very much become the longest shutdown. What will it take to end this?
I hope that the SNAP benefit crisis is something that can break the camel's back and get a continuing resolution passed. I think we've seen the Democrats in Congress rather stubborn about these healthcare demands, which, in my opinion, the first and foremost is continuing the health reforms that already passed under the One Big Beautiful Bill. Um, that's not going to be reversed. That's an accomplishment of this administration and clear policy of theirs. So I think that's rather nonsensical. But then continuing these COVID subsidies, I mean, we're not in the pandemic anymore. You could make a lot of arguments about the cost of healthcare and want to get a negotiation started on healthcare costs. But doing that through a policy that is clearly just out of date, and it's subsidizing insurance companies. I don't think a lot of people support that. Doesn't really meet the moment when, yeah, I think what we're going to see is these wage issues, these cost of living issues become so pertinent. Um, and the government's role in that is it's going to appear rather hypocritical for the side that's trying to bring up those arguments against this administration. Be the ones responsible for the SNAP program not being funded. I mean, it's rather a double-edged sword in that case. But it remains to be seen. Yeah, this has been a ridiculously long shutdown, and I don't know why it hasn't ended yet. It makes perfect sense to pass a clean resolution and then get back to being in office. I mean, they're not even in Congress right now to negotiate these things. They're arguing over Twitter.
Right.
And so they're really not doing their job at the end of the day.
So what really happens in case this does become the longest US shutdown, US government shutdown? Basically, what are going to be some of the economic and social consequences that we will see?
I think there has already been um, a big break. I mean, particularly among supporters of the president and members of his party, realizing that so much of these government programs and services don't work. I mean, we were able to pay the military service people through a private donation. It's rather crazy to say. You wouldn't have thought that would ever have happened. And so I think what we're going to see is a real break on the role of government arguments, and a lot of people realizing how much of this stuff we've created a level of over reliance on government programs. We've created um, this expectation, well, if we want to taper them back, we want to scale them back, it has to be a phase out. It has to be these little changes and stuff, and a lot more big picture thinking around, well, no, what if the government just was not involved in X, Y, or Z entirely? On the other side of the equation, I think you're going to see a lot of arguments for a lot more universalized programs. I think there's going to be a lot of people saying, look, this is the problem with having these different systems that, it's not social security payments that are not getting doled out. It's still running, still working perfectly fine. It's these other programs that have been kind of more moderately implemented and kind of focused in between. And so you're going to have further polarization within both sides on those particular economic issues. I think that there's going to be a lot of people interested in finding ways in which state and local government, as well as businesses and philanthropies, can fill some of these essential needs. I think a lot of people clearly don't trust the federal government. I mean, its polling numbers are like at 10% for the past several decades. And so finding ways in which they can bring control back into those other sectors where people generally trust, their churches, they generally trust their governors, that will make them feel like there's a lot more certainty and a lot more reliability when it comes to these different institutions playing a role, in our economic lives.
Right. Sam, the last Trump presidency had the longest government shutdown, which was 35 days. This is now the second Trump presidency, and it's the shutdown is the second longest and is on its way to become the longest. What do you think the Trump administration is doing wrong, or is this beyond the Trump administration? Is this more to do with overall of how the Congress functions?
I think that the way in which this president uh, functions and leads the country is bold. It's rather independent. It's a little bit less trying to negotiate with the congressional leaders behind the scenes preemptively to make things not happen. He's willing to kind of make a statement and let these things happen. And so I think it's really a stylistic thing. But I also think that the COVID healthcare demands are just, this is just kind of a crazy argument. And I think this has come up time after time again in this era of politics where people are not willing to let go of an issue that has just clearly been put to bed. I mean, people are not willing to move on from an event that happened 5 years ago, and say, well, okay, we're now in a new era. Now we're going to look at things this way. I think there's a lot of relics of the past that keep haunting our politics time after time again. And I think that's really what's to blame. Now was not commentating or following the first Trump administration with the same kind of watchful eye. I was still in grade school, so I don't remember that shutdown, but I'm sure that there was a lot of similarities with people over exaggerating, they're really distorting and making things up, in my opinion. There's a lot of people saying, well, this is, the healthcare thing, it's going to rise all these people's costs, and it's our
Right.
responsibility to keep their costs so low. And you keep seeing these videos put out by the Senate Democrats where it's somebody that retired rather wealthy at 50 years old, and they're paying thousands and thousands of dollars for their basic health care. I mean, the numbers, they just don't add up. I mean, that's not what most people pay for health care. That's not what somebody with a regular employment that was able to retire wealthy, they should be paying for health care. Um, and so I think that people see through all of that. But I would say, yeah, I think these shutdowns might continue to be a problem if we can't get back to being a little bit more realistic about our politics and being willing to admit when we've lost elections, being willing to admit when the other side won an issue and they passed their budget, and that's what it's going to be until things turn around and the other side wins again.
Yeah. So thousands of federal employees have already lost their jobs. They've been fired and they're now struggling in this economy. To top that up, there is a really high chance that food stamps and other social aid benefits are either delayed or halted in November. Do you see that there is going to be a major economic widening in the American society because of this government shutdown?
I don't know if our growing divide in income levels and affordability and stuff is going to be a result of government shutdown, but I think that there certainly will be an impact. I think we're already seeing the impact of some of the Doge cuts, particularly in Virginia in their governor election, and that's mainly a political impact. I think most of those people are high skilled and able to find new jobs in other sectors, but certainly it's a pushback against Republicans. But I do think that there will be a bit of a recalibration in terms of some of these industries that are very government reliant, as well as some of these communities that expected, for certain programs to be able to support them for so long. And that's just a small segment of the pie with this issue. I think that's going to be a lot bigger of a challenge with AI and bigger changes to industry. But I certainly think we'll start to see people reevaluate, these different programs and how they're getting money and what jobs they're working and stuff, as well as Yeah, I mean, the government is being downsized. There's a lot of cuts being made. The shutdown has empowered the Office of Management and Budget to lay even more people off and downsize a lot of this bloated bureaucracy. And so I think there's going to be a big wake up call for a lot of people that thought that they could get some government job. Usually government jobs are pretty cushy, not a lot of concern about losing it overnight or anything, and a lot of people waking up to the reality of what a lot of Americans are is working in the private sector and realizing that any day that they could lose their job and have to find a new one. And I think that that is going to shake things up, but I certainly think there's a lot of upsides to that and becoming a more resilient economy and finding ways that we can scale back the over reliance on government programs, which is really taxpayer money, setting up these different systems. And so we can be prepared for different emergencies, certainly another pandemic, certainly international conflicts, all sorts of things where supply chains in the private sector can respond much quicker, jobs in the private sector can respond much quicker, employees that have multi-versatile skills that they can transfer to new employment, they're able to respond a lot quicker to things. And I think that that will be better for all of us, but there's certainly a shift in the meantime. And so there's a lot of uncertainty through that for sure.
Right. Sam, you had said that it wasn't really about Washington's budget, it was more about America's growing dependence on it. So I want to end with this. Do you think America's safety net is basically on thin ice with the government shutdown and social aid programs almost facing the axe?
I think that our social safety net has been threatened for a long time and is going to be in the next decade as we see particularly Social Security face a potential budgetary shortfall. We see our healthcare system such a hot mess. I mean, things aren't affordable, yet we're spending a ton of money, and there's all these jobs and paperwork, and it's a mess. And I think that the shutdown really highlights how fragile those systems are, how dependent they are on small things like Congress passing a continuing resolution. I think, most people still don't even know what that is at the end of the day. They're confused what we mean by government shutdown.
Right.
And I think it shows how much of this has become just very convoluted. There's a lot of processes and systems and lack of accountability that makes it not a reliable, secure, easy process. And I think that certainly there's going to be a lot of revisiting of our social safety net in the coming years, something we haven't seen in the past couple decades outside of really just continuing to expand benefits, continuing to say, oh, well, people need this, people need that. Of course. Now coming back to the table and realizing the fiscal reality of everything, the government administration reality of everything, I think that's going to hit home sooner than later. And I certainly think that this is a starting point for all of that.
Thank you, Sam, for taking out the time and speaking to Fair Observer. And I hope to have you back very shortly where we can discuss more on what's really going on in the US.
Thank you so much for having me.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.